History repeats itself, as has been written by the journalist Sidney J. Harris, famous for his much-quoted insights, but in such cunning disguise that we never detect the resemblance until the damage is done. Back in 1935, when fascist Italy, one of the 4 permanent members of the League of Nations, declared a war of aggression on Ethiopia, another member of the League chose to appease the aggressor and not to invoke the necessary provision to avert the disaster and enforce the very principles upon which the League of Nations was founded, preventing war through collective security and settling disputes between countries through negotiation and diplomacy. Ethiopia's appeal was ignored, its call for justice and the enforcement of the League's provision was disregarded. Its leaders were mocked, slurred and intimidated. Ethiopia's leader, the Emperor Haile Selassie, warned that it is us today, it will be you tomorrow. Ethiopia's call was prophetic about what would happen a couple of years later. By ignoring Ethiopia's call to the aggressor, the League of Nations sealed its own fate and drove the world to an incalculable disaster, to the Second World War. The question now is whether the United Nations is going to repeat the same disastrous mistake that its predecessor had made back in the 1930s. As leaders of the Tigray People Liberation Front, TPLF, also known as the Marxist-Leninist League of Tigray, as they themselves have unequivocally admitted, the TPLF launched on the 4th of November 2020 a surprise attack on the National Defence Forces of Ethiopia that were stationed in Tigray. They massacred thousands of military personnel, civilian associates and family members. Their motive in launching the attack, according to the US government, was to overthrow the Prime Minister and return to the type of privilege they had enjoyed within the Ethiopian state for the last 27 years. After 6-month law enforcement activities and the administration of emergency aid and a rehabilitation work in the Tigray region, the Ethiopian government accepted the call for a ceasefire and pulled out the army and all federal security forces from the region. This was meant to allow time for collective reflection, a smooth flow of emergency assistance to the needy, and to provide space and time for the farmers to farm their lands before the rainy season passes. To that end, the Ethiopian government had signed a Memorandum of Understanding and a clear framework with the relevant UN agencies and other organisations that provide humanitarian assistance on how to coordinate and deliver aid to the needy in the Tigray region of Ethiopia. The agreement involves the opening and joint manning of emergency aid corridors and the code of conducts that the partners and operators on the ground should follow. Unfortunately, some UN officials and aid operators didn't follow the agreed modus operandi and kept violating the very foundation of the UN Charter, the commitment to maintaining international peace and security, developing friendly relations among nations, and promoting social progress, better living standards and human rights and non-interference in the international affairs of a member state. A recent press release from the Ethiopian government lists the key breaches that led to the expulsion of 7 local UN officials from Ethiopia. Diversion of humanitarian assistance to the TPLF, violating agreed upon security arrangements, transferring communication equipment to be used by the TPLF, continued reticence in demanding the return of more than 400 trucks seized by the TPLF and being used to transport its forces, including underage children, to the neighbouring regional states, and to transfer the loot from the occupied regions in Amhara and Afar back to their bases in Tigray. Dissemination of misinformation and the politicisation of humanitarian assistance. Ethiopia had repeatedly raised its concerns with UN officials about sustained misconduct by some of its staff, including supplying the TPLF with information, communication systems, logistics, and misinforming the world about the situation on the ground. A UN Insider report vividly shows the level of UN bias towards the terror group and to what extent some UN officials involved concocting facts and manipulating data to influence policy decisions. The latest UN statement, Unprecedented Malnutrition in Tigray Amid Indications of Siege,
where we have been wanting to have 100 trucks every day arrive in Tigray to meet the needs of the over 5 million people there. We've never reached that. We've never had that. And it's been about 10% of that over the last 2 or 3 months.
It's one of the outcomes of this manipulation of data and facts. In the aftermath of what has unraveled in the DCR recently, one would think that the UN Secretary General would be shocked, not by the information that the government of Ethiopia has declared 7 United Nations officials as persona non grata, but by the allegations that a member country has made against his staff. One would expect an apology and a firm commitment to commissioning an investigation into the allegations, and not another round of the Security Council meeting to solicit further pressure and unnecessary duress against Ethiopia. The UN Secretary General and his officials are fully aware, and a few of them are intensively engaged in tacitly supporting the TPLF terrorist group, that more than 30,000 TPLF forces who fled to the Sudan after committing ethnic cleansing and the killing of over 900 Amharas in Mai Kadra are involved in military training and cross-border raids and terrorist activities. UNHCR admitted that it is aware of the alleged involvement of the group in armed incursion after TPLF fighters were caught in Gondar administrative zone with UNHCR issued refugee IDs. Following the withdrawal of the federal troops from Tigray region in June 2021, the TPLF attacked and invaded the neighbouring regional states of Amhara and Afar. TPLF looted food aid to feed its forces and starved the most needy in the areas that they control. It seized more than 400 aid trucks and abducted their drivers and assistants, performed further ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity by massacring more than 240 civilians, including 105 children in Afar, 600 in Kobo, thousands more in other parts of Amhara. These have been verified by rights groups and main media outlets on the ground. And yet, neither UN Secretary General nor his officials have condemned nor issued any viable statement on these and related atrocities. It sounds like a déjà vu to note that the UN Secretary General states he doesn't accept staff expulsion, and Ethiopia has no legal rights to expel UN officials. What can the UN do? One would expect that UN officials are fully familiar with the UN Charter and associated documents about its roles and responsibilities as to the weak nations, but is an entity created and financed by its own members to nurture and promote cooperation among nations, uphold non-interference in all its activities, and maintain international peace and security. The UN should learn from past mistakes. Misguided policy, appeasement and support for the aggressor and for terrorists only led us to untold destructions. Our recent history, the unfolding crisis in some corners of the world, show that neither appeasement, intimidation nor forces against the weak would ever succeed. We are yet to get out of the muddle that we have started in Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, Libya and many others. The Horn of Africa is a powder keg, in fact a black hole. If we fail to manage it carefully, no one will be safe and the rest of the world would get sucked into its black hole. Ethiopia must have broken the record for being an agenda item for the Security Council meetings. In less than 1 year, the Security Council met 9 times to discuss Ethiopia. Does Ethiopia deserve that level of attention when parts of the world are in dire situation and need more attention from the international community? Ethiopians are watching, in fact. Africa and the whole world are watching the injustice being committed. We call upon the UN Security Council not to let history repeat itself. You have the power and a moral duty to stop the pattern.
I don't want to hide my surprise in the convening of this meeting of the Security Council. We find it incomprehensible for this august body to discuss the decision of a sovereign state exercised within the domain of international law and sovereign prerogative. There have been several instances where governments had expelled UN staff and other diplomatic envoys for so many disclosed and undisclosed reasons. Did the Council ever meet to vindicate such a decision? Not to the best of our recollection.